The September 25th, 2024 meeting of the State Allocation Board is now called to order. This meeting is being held in person in the auditorium of the East End Complex located at 1500 Capitol Avenue for anyone that would like to provide public comment in person. The meeting is also being conducted by way of Zoom meeting for members of the public that would like to participate remotely. In order for this meeting to run efficiently for those participating remotely, please note the following guidelines. All attendees will be muted during the meeting. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom meeting interface. I will call your name at the appropriate time and OPSC staff will request to unmute you. If you are calling into the meeting and not using a computer or the Zoom application on a mobile device, you will be unable to provide public comment. Ms. Jones, will you please call the roll, noting any members that will be joining us from a remote location?
Certainly. Senator Wilk. Senator Laird. Senator Newman.
Here.
Assemblymember Murasucci.
Here.
Assemblymember Davies.
Here.
Assemblymember Alvarez.
Here.
Juan Morales.
Here.
Jeremy Smith.
Here.
Ana Lasso.
Here.
Chris Ferguson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
The board will now meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11,126, Subdivision E, for the purpose of conferring with and receiving advice from legal counsel regarding pending litigation. All board members, please follow Ms. Jones to the adjoining conference room. Remote members will join the closed session with the assistance of OPSC's communications team. The open meeting will continue upon adjournment of the closed session. Apologies. Just please note that the closed session will be for the purpose of conferring with and receiving advice from legal counsel regarding pending litigation entitled California School Finance Authority et al. V. Today's Fresh Start Incorporated et al. Los Angeles County Superior Court Case 23 STCP 03750. Thanks. Pursuant to Government Code Sections 11126E1 and E2A, the State Allocation Board has met in closed session to confer with and receive advice from legal counsel regarding pending litigation. The closed session is concluded and the board provided direction to the executive officer regarding the pending litigation. We will now commence with the open meeting of the State Allocation Board. Ms. Kirk, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minutes for the June 26, 2024 meeting are on stamped pages 1 through 9 of the agenda, and I'd like to request that the board approve the minutes.
Are there any public comments on the minutes? Seeing no comments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Senator Newman. Aye. Assemblymember Murasucci.
Aye.
Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Assemblymember Alvarez. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Ms. Kirk, please proceed.
Thank you. I'd like to draw your attention to the executive officer's statement, which is on pages 10 and 11 of today's agenda. Firstly, since our last meeting was held in late June, I'm pleased to provide an update that on July 3rd, Assembly Bill 247 was chaptered, which places a statewide school facilities bond bill on the November 2024 general election ballot. The measure has qualified as Proposition 2 on the ballot. If it is passed by voters, in part, the act would provide $10 billion to construct and modernize education facilities, of which $8.5 billion is set aside for transitional kindergarten through secondary educational facilities. In addition, Proposition 2 would grandfather applications submitted on or before October 30th, 2024, requires submission of a 5-year school facilities master plan as a condition of participating in the school facility program, establishes a points-based determination and sliding scale for the required state and local match for school facility program projects, establishes a new program for the testing and remediation of lead in water fountains and faucets on school sites, and establishes several new supplemental grants, as well as authorizes the State Allocation Board to provide interim housing assistance following specified natural disasters. These are just a few of the provisions of that proposed bond. If the act is passed by voters in the November election, staff will present an item at the December 3rd State Allocation Board meeting regarding initial timelines and considerations for implementation. I'm also pleased to announce that October 1st will be the effective date of regulations that the board previously approved, which extend the timeline on fund release for applications to the preschool, transitional kindergarten, and full-day kindergarten facilities grant program. Those applications that received apportionments in the 3rd and 4th filing round and any potential future filing round are able to access this increase. We also have our meeting schedule set for the remainder of this year. After today, our next meeting will be held on October 23rd, and the final meeting of the year will be held on December 3rd. I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. This is not an action item. Are there any comments or questions from board members about the executive officer statement? Seeing none, are there any public comments regarding the executive officer statement? We will now proceed to the consent agenda, Ms. Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The consent agenda is on stamped pages 12 through 194 of today's agenda and includes nearly $400 million in new apportionments for 70 projects throughout California. I'd like to request that the board approve the consent agenda.
Are there any comments or questions from board members on the consent agenda?
Move the consent.
If I may quickly, just to confirm, are there any public comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I have a motion. I believe I heard a second. Excellent. Secretary, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Senator Newman.
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso. Aye. Lasso, aye. Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson, aye. That motion does carry.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. If you could please proceed.
Thank you. We have financial reports on stamped pages 195 through 212 in today's agenda, and I'm happy to address any questions there may be.
Are there any questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, are there any questions or comments from members of the public? We will now proceed to the appeals on today's agenda. Mr. Watanabe, if you could please proceed.
Thank you. I'm on page 213, stamp page 213 of the agenda. The first appeal we have before you is Rockford Elementary School District. Rockford Elementary School District is a one-school district down in Tulare County that serves K through 8. In 2023-2024 enrollment was roughly 282 pupils. This district is requesting the board reinstate their modernization apportionment and also approve additional funding for their school facility program project to use up all modernization eligibility that they had at the time their new construction application was submitted to OPSC. Back in 2012, the district had originally submitted a design application for 100 pupil grants. At the time they submitted their full construction grant application, they again requested 100 pupil grants, which was all they had left on their eligibility baseline at the time. With that application, the board approved their funding in August of 2023. The district had 1 year to submit a fund release authorization and get under construction for that project, and their deadline was August 22 of 2024. This appeal request if approved by the board at 2023 grant amounts, would amount to another 1.7 million or so to the school district. A little bit of background for modernization funding. The establishment of modernization eligibility funding is site-specific for each school district. It uses an enrollment of the students on the site compared with ages of the buildings on the site. That creates your modernization eligibility baseline, but is not a guarantee of funding. You must submit a funding application to our office. The baseline can be updated over time for changes in enrollment and also additional buildings that become of age, but it is not a funding application. Once a district submits a funding application, they can submit any number of pupil grant requests on that as long as they reach the minimum that's required in regulation. Under our program, the minimum that you can ask for in K through 8 is 101 pupil grants, but because they only have 100 grants, that's what they are funded at. After this district was apportioned in August of 2023, it came to our attention that OPSC staff had not processed 2 eligibility updates for the district. Had we had processed those eligibility updates for the district, it would have amounted roughly 363 pupils available to the district. However, because their original funding application only asked for 100 pupil grants, they are not allowed to increase their application to request all of their grants. They would have had to step out of line, submit a new funding application at that point to ask for all 363 grants. In talking with the district, it appears it was an oversight on the district's part to ask for those additional pupil grants. We would point that had staff processed those eligibility applications, we would have bumped them up to the minimum 101 as a requirement of regulation, but that actually would have resulted in a loss of $42,000 to the district's current funding. So because it was our error for that part, we're not pursuing that at this time. Resubmittal of the applications is fundamental from a part of our program. In the early days of our program, as school districts submitted applications, if there were fatal flaws in their application, what they would have to do is get out of line and get back in line. And when we have lots of funding for our program, that's not an issue with them. We process it right away. But given that we are processing applications several years in arrears, getting out of line is not as easy as it used to be. As you know, we are slated to run out of funding authority in our program somewhere around February of 2025. Currently, our applications received beyond bond authority list through the August 31st. We are roughly $3.9 billion oversubscribed between new construction and modernization alone. If the district were to resubmit and submit an application today, it is unknown at this time when they'd be funded for the entirety of their pupil grants, but it is an option to them. They do not lose their pupil grants. They can apply for that anytime. At the end of the day, as a conclusion for this particular project, staff does not support the district request. It is a fundamental part of our program in terms of line jumping, asking for a set amount of grants, and then asking for an increase after the fact amounts to line jumping in our program. So we do not support the district's request. Staff recommends from the board. We recommend the board reinstate their apportionment as is with today's date. Give them a new 365 days. They submitted their appeal request back in February. They've been waiting for the board's decision on how to handle their appeal request since that time. They have indicated they can't move forward with their project. The scope of this project involves electrical upgrades throughout the campus, roofing upgrades so they can put HVAC on it in the campus that's never had HVAC in the Central Valley down there. So the 1 year would give them an opportunity to mature their project. If they have to de-scope their project, take out short-term loans to cover their project, they have a variety of options available to them, or wait out, see what happens in future funding available to the program. But at this time, we can't support that. The district is online if there's questions, as well as their consultants.
Thank you, Mr. Watanabe. The district and their representatives have joined via Zoom. They are Ms. Caron Borba, the superintendent/principal, Mr. Owen Alvarez, the consultant, and Mr. Douglas Jansen, the architect. Would the district or the representatives like to provide any comment?
Hi, my name is Karen Borba, and I'm the superintendent principal at Rockford School. We are a very unique school district and have a lot of students with a lot of need. Our main concern is that our children deserve to have air conditioning in their classrooms. If we want to enhance their learning, we need to definitely be able to have them in an environment that is healthy for them to learn. So I ask please that you will grant the funding for us so we can move forward.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from board members? I do have just an initial question, and that is, when would, just procedurally, this sounds like the consultant that was assisting the district may have overlooked this, or what is the sort of fact pattern that led the district to be unaware that they might be eligible for more?
Yeah, they had submitted their eligibility updates in 2014 and 2018. So had we processed those, there would be 363 pupils in the baseline. But when they and when we process their funding applications, we typically process those eligibility applications. We didn't in this particular case, but even if we had, the district only requested 100 grants on their funding application, so that's the cap at what they are. We've been consistent in our program. We don't allow changes to that pupil grant request except to bring them up to the minimum 101 grants. But they could, like I said previously, they can always withdraw the app and request it, or they can submit a second modernization app for the rest of the project.
Yes, so I'd like to just state that I am very sympathetic with the district's circumstances being in a financial hardship school, and I understand there was some delay in getting the back and forth of communication, but I also understand that jumping the line would really set a precedent, and I would say that given the limited amount of funds that we have to give out, I would recommend going with staff's recommendation to go with the original amount that's already been that reinstates the original apportionment. Knowing that there's a bond that's going to be coming in November, at least gives us some opportunity for the school district to reapply later on. So I just would personally move to approve staff's recommendation, option 1, which reinstates the district's original apportionment as approved by the board last year, and provides the district, this opportunity to go forward as their original application.
Excuse me. Can I speak again? We are not eligible for a bond.
Yes, I believe.
I understand that there is a state bond that will be on the ballot in November, and there will be, if that passes, there will be future funds available that will be made available to schools throughout the state. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course.
Yeah, and certainly before we take up that motion, just checking to see if there are any other comments or questions from members.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Just as a follow-up, it seems like in 2019, when the district submitted their full funding application, that could have been the opportunity to potentially increase the pupil grants. I'm curious, maybe this is for the superintendent, did you have consultants helping you at that time when you submitted your full funding back in 2019?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And they were not aware that you could have increased your pupil grants at that time?
I believe they made an error on their end, as well as the state had an error.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
There
Can you
was
repeat that, please?
There was an error on our end and an error on the state side.
Okay.
Mr. Watanabe, if you could speak to what that error might have been.
Yeah, they are. So back in 2012, the board created the applications received by bond authority list when we ran out of bond authority. But since that time, the board has chosen to create this list to continue to receive funding applications as well as eligibility adjustments. At this time, we have over 10,000 adjustments we haven't done. So our current practice standard is, as the funding application is processed, we'll go through the entire backlog and see which ones apply to each particular site. In this particular project, we did not grab those back applications. However, The most they would have been able to increase to is 101 because that's the bare minimum allowed in regulation. But we would not allow them to request all 363 grants at that time. Well, let me clarify that. They could have asked for 363 grants, but they asked for 100. We don't allow them to amend their application to increase to the 363 grants because the application walked in the door in 2019 at 100. That's their cap.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll just add, in that scenario, if they hadn't been aware of the full eligibility available to them, the only option under the regulations would have been for them to increase that request by one pupil grant to raise it to the minimum, or they could have opted to increase to the full eligibility, but that would necessitate them getting out of line, getting a new date for their full grant application. And because the full grant application was processed in 2023, that would mean that they would still be on the applications received beyond bond authority list today.
Got it. So if I could ask, I too have some sympathy here for the students in particular. If I could ask the superintendent, what types of temperatures are you seeing at the school site, and what are the students at that school site experiencing?
So we've had over 100-degree temperatures most of the month since we started, and the classrooms are about 85 degrees, and with the humidity from the evaporative coolers in there.
Got it. So there are existing systems in those classrooms. They're just not efficient to the level that you would like to see.
I think if they're not sufficient for the level that any child should have to sit in a classroom at that temperature with the humidity dripping. I don't feel like it's a conducive learning environment for the children.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from board members?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes. I would just like to say to the superintendent of Rockford School District that the school bond Proposition 2, I mean, it has specific dollars set aside for small rural districts like yours. It also has specific dollars for dealing with HVAC and extreme heating. So I think I could say this, but please tell all of your voters in your community to support Proposition 2, because your district is a classic example of a district that stands to benefit from this statewide school bond.
It's my understanding we're not eligible for that bond. Is it for every school district?
It is for every school district, and because you qualify for the financial hardship program, you qualify for up to 100% of your costs being covered by the state by Proposition 2.
Now, our problem is the electricity. We don't have enough power. We're running single phase. Will that qualify within it?
I would have to defer to the SIB board, but I believe that all costs related to modernization, including but especially the HVAC, to address the extreme heat conditions. I know that those provisions are specifically in the school bond.
Remember, if we could quickly have staff speak to what may or may not be eligible, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Proposition 2 doesn't change the eligibility of modernization expenditures, so you can do it for your electrical infrastructure upgrades, the re-roofing that you plan to increase your structural integrity for your roofs and replace them, as well as the HVAC units as well. All three of those are eligible under the current and future program.
So what this would really come down to is if they were to not move forward with this project, it would be a matter of, assuming there's a disposition of the bond in November, they would need to withdraw and resubmit, which would then mean their processing timeline would be changed. Is that correct?
They have two options. They can keep the application. If the board approves staff's recommendation for option 1, they can keep that project. Let us know right away if that's their intent, because what we would do is make notes in our file to know that this project is intended to be split funded off of 2 modernization funding applications, so they can de-scope the current project, fund whatever they can under the current grants, and then apply for the balance of the grants under a second funding application. So our staff would just need to know that during the processing of the current app to not call this project basically full and final.
Certainly understand. We have a motion from member. If I may, before I get to the motion, are there any comments from the public? I have a motion from member Lasso. Is there a second, or you certainly may. Before we take that up, we do have another question.
Thank you. I know that what the staff is offering right now would have some type of revenue that you could use. It would just be changing the scope of work. I'm curious, with that amount of money, how much of the project could be done, or how many classrooms could actually be taken care of, especially whether it's air conditioner or it's putting in the infrastructure, so when you do get that, it's ready to go.
We have a consultant on, but I believe because we don't have I think it's 3-phase electricity, that the electricity is what we need. That's the key component of this project.
Mr. Chair, just want to make sure, Superintendent, that you understand the potential options here. You don't have to withdraw the whole thing, right? You can keep part of the apportionment that you already had, should the board reinstate it, and that's money that you will have available now, versus rescinding the entire thing, reapplying, and being at the back of the line, not knowing what's going to happen in November for another bond opportunity. So just want to make sure they understand, your options between keeping the apportionment, should the board reinstate it, versus withdrawing the whole thing and getting at the back of the line.
I don't think we can withdraw the whole thing. I just think we were hoping that we would be supported by the state board to offer what our students deserve.
Understood. Thank you.
Seeing that we have a motion before us, is there a second, or we have a second?
Yes.
Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Senator Newman?
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci?
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies?
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez? Abstain.
Hi, do you hear me?
Oh, I heard you now. Thank you. Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales?
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith?
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso? Aye. Lasso, aye. Chris Ferguson?
Not voting.
Abstain. Ferguson, abstain. I'm sorry, that motion does carry.
Thank you. Mr. Watanabe, if we could please proceed.
Yeah, the next appeal is on page 227. It's for Vista Unified School District down in San Diego County. This is under a different program. This district is also requesting reinstatement of their apportionment for a career technical education facilities grant program at their Rancho Buena Vista High School. The career technical education program is a separate carve-out bond authority from the bond funds. It's typically funded in filing rounds. So the board last time did 2 filing rounds. They are highly competitive. All applications must go to CDE first for scoring their application, and then they file an application for funding with OPSC. The round funds the highest projects or highest scoring projects first, and then we work our way down the list until we run out of money. Because there's an unknown in whether a school district is high enough to be scored, the program has what's called a reservation of funds apportionment. So once we know all the projects to be funded, the board actually sets aside a cash apportionment for each school district, and they have 1 year to submit DSA and CD approved plans to our office. After that, after they submit that to our office, then they have 90 days to submit a fund release request and get under construction contracts for their project. In this particular district's case, back in October of 2022, most recently is when they received their last reservations of funds apportionment. So they had until October 26th of 2023 to submit us DSA and CD approved plans. They did do that in August of 2023, but in OPSC's review of those plans, we realized there was a change of scope for their project. There's two changes of scope to their project. One, they switched their pathway from machining and forming technologies to welding and materials and joining pathways, as well as, and the second part of their scope change was changing their building design from a two-story building down to a one-story building. And that was largely because they found out under design that the dust and fume removal systems required 15 to 20-foot ceilings, which was cost prohibitive in a two-story building. So with that change, we told them they needed to go back to CD to have them approve the plans for the new scope of the project. The other thing they needed to do is make sure that their CT original filing application did not change scores to make sure they weren't essentially line jumping in that particular case. CD confirmed that the plan approvals and that the score would not have changed. So we received those completed set of plans on October 25th, 2023, basically a day before the deadline. There was no issues with staff at that particular point in time, but we did need to present the scope change to the board because it's not what the board originally approved. At that time, we told the district that we would get back to them on next steps on how to proceed. And unfortunately, due to a fault of OPSC, it took us 2 months to get back to them. At that time, we got back to them in December of 2023. The district had closed for their holiday break. And upon returning from holiday break, our email got buried and they didn't see it. Their 90-day deadline expired on January 23. And when we checked in with them the day after, they realized that no extra documentations were submitted to stop the automatic rescission of that project on January 23. And looking at this project, the total value to the school district is just under $1.4 million. They have completed the project and occupied it back in 2022, so it is essentially a reimbursement project. As I mentioned before, CTE is a funding round-based program. If the board does not approve the district's appeal, this $1.4 million will basically sit in unused funds until such time we get enough funding to actually create a filing round. And we generally don't do that until it's close to around $100 million because of the amount of work involved in the program. So for those considerations, staff actually is supportive of the district's appeal. Given that it's reimbursement, we recommend the board reinstate their priority funding apportionment from today. That would give them 90 days until December 24, 2024 to submit their fund release authorization. Because it's reimbursement, they should be able to do that literally tomorrow even, and then we release funds to them within 4 weeks. And the district is available on the line if you have any questions for the district.
Thank you, Mr. Watanabe. The district has joined the meeting via Zoom to answer any questions from the board. The two representatives, I believe, are Sean Loescher, the interim superintendent and chief operations officer, and Mr. Robert Crowell, their career pathways coordinator. Would the district like to provide any comments?
At this time, we wanted just to say thank you to Mr. Watanabe and for the State Allocation Board for this opportunity for the appeal. And we're just here to express our thanks and then also to answer any direct questions that the board may have for us, and don't plan to take any additional time from the board, so that way you can contemplate this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from board members?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the staff recommendation.
Just very quickly, are there any public comments? We are good. Secretary, you will please call the roll.
Certainly, Senator Newman. Newman, aye. Assemblymember Murasucci.
Aye.
Murasucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson, aye. And that motion carries.
Mr. Watanabe, would you please proceed?
Thank you. I'm on page 315 of the agenda today. This is 5 appeals combined in one because they are similarly asked for all 5 of them. The board's heard many of these appeals in the past. These are 5 school districts asking for accelerated processing and apportionments for their modernization projects to free up local funding to provide the local match on the federal public schools on military installation program. So we've talked about this program many times in the past, but since 2012, OPSC has been actively working with school districts throughout the state for these specialized projects. And the board actually had a subcommittee in 2010 to talk about what the state could do for these particular projects. The PSMI program developed a federal grant where they did an analysis of all the public schools across the United States, and then they ranked them on which ones had the most efficiency. Since 2010, they've continually since 2010, there's been continuous appropriations throughout the time where they keep moving down the list. And now these school districts all have been invited to participate in the program. It is a complex program after working with them for a good 12 years now. It's a multi-phase approach. They have design and construction funding. And building on military bases is certainly more challenging than a normal school district with force protection requirements and other building requirements they need to do. But the federal program will provide up to 80% state fund or 80% federal funding, provided the local match can be provided by a 20% funding. There's 5 school districts on this particular asking for accelerated processing for 7 projects. They are laid out on page 320. In total, the board's approval of these items would result in roughly $25 million in state funding to leverage $336 million in federal funding. In previous approvals by the board has funded 19 projects for these types of projects at 10 school sites throughout California. We've given out almost $80 million in state funding for school projects on military installations, and state schools have received over $365 million in federal funding. So it's been a very successful program. Again, we are asking the board, staff supports all of these districts' requests because of the specialized nature and the leveraging of federal funding, though we do acknowledge that currently, as I mentioned in the other items, we are oversubscribed in the current program by about $3.9 billion in funding, so they would be jumping ahead of line of those projects. But because of the ability to leverage $337 million approximately in federal funding, staff is supportive of this request, as has the board been typical. We do have representatives from the federal program here to field any questions on the program itself, as well as all 5 school districts are on Zoom too to field any questions on their specific projects.
Thank you, Mr. Watanabe. Would either the representatives for the school districts or the project managers like to provide any additional comment? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt this staff recommendation.
Hands raised.
If we could hold the motion and second momentarily, if the district would like to present. Would the representative for Sierra Sands like to present? I believe you're unmuted. Seeing no comment, are there any other public comments? I have a motion and a second. Ms. Secretary, if you could call the roll.
I sure will. Senator Newman.
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Lasso, aye. And then Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson, aye. And that motion does carry.
Ms. Kirk, if you could please proceed with the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On stamped pages 542 through 547 of the agenda, excuse me, I jumped ahead of myself. If I can actually revise that, on stamped pages 523 through 541 of your agenda, we do have an action item with priority funding apportionments. This item would provide priority funding apportionments totaling approximately $52.2 million for projects that submitted a valid certification in our last priority funding filing round, converting their previous unfunded approvals into full apportionments and providing 90 days for fund release. I request the board's approval of this item.
Are there any questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, are there any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, is there a motion on this action item?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Definitely. Senator Newman. Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson, aye. And that motion does carry.
Ms. Kirk, please proceed.
Thank you. Now would be the appropriate time to direct you to stamp pages 542 through 547 of the agenda. There we have proposed emergency regulatory amendments to the school facility program. Specifically, the proposed amendments would authorize the board to provide an extended fund release deadline of up to 18 months for direct apportionments to projects pertaining to a public school on a military installation receiving a federal grant with a required local matching share. The text of the proposed regulations is reflected on attachment B of the item. I'd be happy to answer any questions and would request the board's approval to adopt the proposed regulations and authorize that we file them with the Office of Administrative Law.
Before we take up that motion, just quickly, seeing no comments or questions from the board, are there any public comments? Seeing none, do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Senator Newman.
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Lasso, aye. And Chris Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson, aye. And that motion does carry.
Ms. Kirk, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On stamp pages 548 through 591 of the agenda, we have reports and information items for the board's reference. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. This is not an action item. I don't see any questions or comments from board members. Are there any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none. With that, the September 25th, 2024 meeting of the State Allocation Board is adjourned.